Dr. Brett Harris slammed his clipboard down on the nurse's station counter so hard that the pens scattered across the floor. "I don't care what she thinks she saw," he said, his voice carrying down the entire hallway. "Matafa is a night nurse. She changes bedpans and checks vitals. She doesn't get to flag my patient's chart without my authorization." The charge nurse, Linda Cho, stood with her mouth slightly open, glancing toward the corner where Sina Matafa had been standing just a moment before. Harris leaned in close, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than a shout. "The next time that woman oversteps, I want it documented. Are we clear?" Nobody answered. They didn't have to. Everyone at the Nashville Sunday Medical Center knew exactly what Dr. Harris meant when he used that tone. Everyone except perhaps the woman he was talking about. If this story speaks to you, please take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to Sina Matafa and the night that changed everything. The night shift at the Nashville Fabi. A medical center started the same way it always did. Sina Matafa pushed through the staff entrance on the ground floor at 10:45, 15 minutes before her shift technically began, because that was who she was. She carried a foil-covered pan of coconut bread that she had baked that afternoon, the kind her grandmother used to make in American Samoa, dense and slightly sweet with a golden crust that crinkled when you pressed it. She set it down at the security desk without a word, just a small nod to Gerald Pitts, the overnight guard who had worked the desk for 11 years and who greeted her the same way every single night. "Coconut bread," he said, already reaching for the foil. "Same as always," she said. "You're going to make me fat, Matafa." "You were already fat when I got here, Gerald." He laughed, a big round sound that bounced off the lobby ceiling, and she kept walking toward the elevator, pulling her badge from her scrub's pocket. She rode up to the third floor alone. She looked at her reflection in the metal doors for exactly the 3 seconds it took the elevator to climb, then she looked away. She had never been comfortable studying her own face for too long. Something about it made her feel like she was waiting for a stranger to look back. The third floor was quiet the way hospital floors are always quiet at night. Not silent, never silent, but hushed in a particular way that felt like holding breath. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms. The overhead lights had been dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting everything in a pale amber wash. 2 nurses at the station were finishing their handoff notes, and one of them, Darnell. Webb glanced up when Sina came through the door. "Dr. Harris was looking for you," Darnell said. Sina didn't stop walking. "I heard. He was pretty loud about it. He usually is." Darnell watched her move toward the medication room, that same unhurried walk she always had, the kind that never seemed rushed, but somehow covered ground faster than anyone expected. He had worked with Sina for 2 years and still couldn't quite put his finger on what it was about her that felt different from other nurses. She wasn't cold exactly. She was warm when she needed to be patient with the difficult patients, gentle with the ones who were in real pain. But there was something underneath all of that warmth that felt contained, like she had built walls around something and learned to wallpaper them so neatly that most people never noticed they were there. He went back to his notes. Sina pulled her assignment sheet and started making her way down the patient roster. She had 14 patients that night, which was standard. Most of them were long-term residents, veterans dealing with chronic conditions, men in their 60s and 70s who had come home from wars that the country had mostly stopped talking about. She knew their names, their histories, the medications they hated, and the ones they relied on. She knew which ones would be awake at midnight because the nightmares didn't let them sleep, and which ones would sleep so deeply that she would have to lay a hand on their arm just to make sure they were still breathing. Room 302 was Walter Bream, 71, a Vietnam-era Army vet with congestive heart failure and a habit of sneaking crackers from the visitor's snack machine when nobody was looking. Sina checked his vitals, adjusted his oxygen line, and tucked the edge of his blanket back without waking him. She noted the reading on his monitor, slightly elevated, not dangerously so, and moved on. Room 305 was different. She had flagged room 305 earlier that week, which was what had set Dr. Harris off. The patient in 305 was Frank Kowalski, a 58-year-old retired Army sergeant who had checked in 3 days ago following what was listed on his chart as minor cardiac monitoring. Sina had taken one look at Frank Kowalski's chart and understood immediately that there was nothing minor about his situation. The man had a federal protection detail, 2 U.S. Marshals posted at the end of the hall, a physician's notation that his name was not to appear on any public admission logs. Frank Kowalski was not just a patient, he was a witness, and somebody somewhere wanted him quiet before he could testify. Sina had flagged the chart because she noticed a discrepancy in his medication order, a dosage that had been quietly altered in the system, not dramatically enough to kill him quickly, but enough over 3 or 4 days to weaken his heart in ways that would look entirely natural on a death certificate. She had brought it to Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris had told her she was overreading a clerical entry. Then he had made his feelings about night nurses known to the entire floor. She pushed open the door to 305. Frank Kowalski was awake. He usually was at this hour. He had the kind of eyes that had seen too much sleep become a complicated transaction, something you bargain for in short installments instead of taking all at once. He was a broad man, thick through the shoulders, with a gray beard he clearly hadn't bothered to trim in weeks. He looked at Sina the way patients always looked at her, not with fear or suspicion, but with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who had learned to take the measure of a person before deciding how much to trust them. "Nurse Matafa," he said. "Mr. Kowalski, how's the pain tonight?" 4 out of 10, same lie I tell everyone. She almost smiled. "So, somewhere around a 7. 6.5, I'm not dramatic." He watched her check his IV line, watched her log the reading on his monitor. "They told me you flagged my chart. Someone corrected it." "Harris." She didn't answer that directly. "Your medication dosage is back to where it should be. You're going to be fine." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You know what I'm doing here? I know what your chart says." "That's not what I asked." Sina looked at him, then really looked at him, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with medicine. It was recognition. The kind that happens between people who have operated in worlds where the stakes were measured in human lives and the consequences of a wrong move were permanent. "I know you're important," she said, "and I know someone tried to make you less important 3 days ago through a medication entry, and I know that my supervisor told me I was wrong about that." She set his chart down. "I wasn't wrong." Frank Kowalski looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly. "No," he said, "you weren't." She was 4 rooms down the hall when she heard it. It wasn't loud. That was the thing. If she hadn't been who she was, she would have missed it entirely. It was the sound of a door opening at the far end of the corridor, the stairwell access door, and the specific cadence of footsteps that followed. 3 sets, moving in a pattern that wasn't random, spaced in a way that told her with the absolute certainty of a body that had spent years learning to read these things, that whoever was coming through that door had done this before. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. She stood still for exactly 3 seconds, listening, cataloging, and then she resumed walking slower now toward the medication room at the end of the hall, and she pulled it open and stepped inside and let the door swing almost but not quite all the way closed behind her. Through the narrow gap she watched, there were 3 of them. They wore civilian clothes, but the clothes were wrong, too dark, too functional, too deliberately unremarkable. They moved the way men moved when they had been trained to move with weight, distributed low hands loose, but ready heads on a constant slow swivel. One of them gestured to the other 2 with a quick hand signal, and the 2 broke off, one toward the nurse's station, one toward the far end of the hall. The third continued forward, toward room 305. Sina exhaled slowly through her nose. She looked around the medication room. Shelving, supply cart, a tall metal IV pole leaning against the wall in the corner, a code cart padlocked to the floor. She picked up the IV pole. It was heavier than most people would assume, nearly 4 feet of solid aluminum, and she held it the way you hold something that you know how to use, which is to say she held it lightly near the balance point so that it could move in either direction without telegraphing where it was going. Then she heard the screaming. It started somewhere near the nurse's station, a short clipped cry cut off almost immediately, and then a man's voice, hard and flat, saying, "Nobody moves, not one of you moves." And then another voice closer, a second one, saying something into what sounded like a radio. And then the overhead lights in the corridor went out. Not all of them. The emergency backup lighting kicked in almost immediately, washing everything in red. But the primary overheads went dark, and she knew with a cold, crystalline certainty that someone had cut the main power to the floor. This was not opportunistic. This was planned. These men had studied the building. They knew where the breakers were. They knew the layout of the floor. They had a target and they had a timeline, and they were already executing. She gave herself exactly 4 seconds to feel afraid. 4 seconds. It was a habit she had built over years in places where fear was a luxury that got people killed. You gave it 4 seconds, you let it move through your body like a current, and then you put it somewhere. It couldn't reach you, and you went to work. 4 seconds. She went to work. The first man came past the medication room door moving fast, and Sina let him go. She tracked him through the gap. He was heading for the stairwell on the south end, cutting off the escape route, exactly what she would have done, and she turned her attention back to the corridor. The second man was at the nurse's station, which meant he had Darnell and the other nurse, Casey Huang, in his line of sight. She could hear Darnell's voice low and controlled, and she was briefly and fiercely grateful that Darnell was the kind of man who didn't panic, who kept his voice level when everything around him was falling apart. "Just stay calm," Darnell was saying. "Everybody stay calm." "Shut up," the man at the station said. Sina identified the third man's position by sound. He was outside room 305. She could hear him working the door, not the handle, the hinges, which told her he suspected the room might be secured from the inside. He knew exactly where he was going and what he was there to do. She had maybe 90 seconds before he got through that door and Frank Kowalski stopped being a witness to anything. She moved. She came out of the medication room in one smooth motion. AV pole horizontal across her body, and she crossed the 10 feet of corridor between her and the man at room 305 before he had processed the sound of the door opening behind him. He started to turn. She was already on him. She drove the pole across his upper body in a lateral strike that knocked his right arm wide, sending whatever he was holding in that hand skittering across the floor. And then she pivoted using his momentum against him and had him facing the wall with his arm behind his back before either of them had said a single word. He was big, bigger than her by at least 60 pounds. He was also surprised in a way that a trained person almost never allows themselves to be, and that surprise cost him the 2 seconds he would have needed to recover his footing. By the time he understood what had happened, his face was against the wall, and Sina had his wrist locked in a grip that he could not break without dislocating his own shoulder. "Don't," she said. Her voice was very quiet. That was the thing nobody who knew her from the hospital floor understood. She was always quietest when things were most serious. The louder something got, the quieter she became, and right now her voice was barely above a whisper. "If you move, I'm going to break this." He went still. "Who sent you?" she said. He didn't answer. "That's fine," she said. "We'll figure it out." From the nurse's station, she heard the second man's voice sharpen. "Where's the third one? He was just..." And then silence. She could feel the man against the wall, calculating. He was doing math, 1 down, 2 still active. Where was backup coming from? She answered his question for him by doing something unexpected. She stepped back, let him turn, kept the IV pole between them and said, "Run." He stared at her. "Run," she said again, "or stay. But if you stay, I want you to think very carefully about whether you actually know what you're doing right now." She tilted her head slightly, watching him the way you watch something that is about to make a decision on you've already predicted. "Because I do." He swung at her. She was not there when the swing arrived. She had moved before his shoulder even rotated, reading the intention in the shift of his weight, and the arc of his fist found nothing but empty air while she came in underneath it and hit him once precisely at the juncture of his neck and shoulder, where a certain nerve cluster lives, and he went down like every light in his body had been switched off simultaneously. She stood over him. She was breathing hard but steady. She had not raised her voice. From the nurse's station, Darnell's voice came through the red-washed corridor. Sina, is that you? What is happening?" "How many on your end?" she called back. A pause. "1, he's got a gun." "Sina, is it pointed at you right now?" Another pause. Then carefully, "No, he's looking toward the south stairwell." "Okay," she said. "Stay low. Get Casey under the desk. Don't come out until I tell you." "Sina, what are you, Darnell?" Her voice was still quiet. "Trust me." She heard him exhale. "'Kay," he said. "'Kay." The man she had put on the floor was not unconscious, not exactly. He was stunned, his system rebooting from a nerve shock that would fade in minutes, and she pulled the cord from the portable equipment unit next to the wall and used it to secure his hands before he could decide to reboot faster than expected. She was not gentle about it, but she was not unnecessarily rough either. She had learned a long time ago that the goal was never to punish. The goal was to contain. She picked up what he had dropped when she first hit him. It was not a gun. It was a radio, a compact encrypted unit, and that told her more than a gun would have. These men were in communication with someone. There was a fourth party somewhere, probably external coordinating, someone who had planned this with enough sophistication to cut the floor power, send 3 operators in, and equip them with encrypted comms. The radio crackled. "Team 2 report. We're 30 seconds behind schedule." She looked at the radio in her hand. She thought for exactly 1 second. Then she pressed the transmit button and said nothing. Just held it open for a breath long enough for the person on the other end to hear the ambient sound of the corridor, The monitor beeps the red-lit silence of the third floor and know that something had changed, that something had gone wrong. The radio went silent. She moved to the south stairwell, the one the first man had gone to cover. She had not forgotten about him. She had simply been doing things in the right order, which was something that took most people a lifetime to learn, and which she had learned in places that did not forgive the learning curve. The door to the stairwell was heavy and fire-rated, and it swung open on a well-oiled hinge when she pushed it. She heard breathing before she saw anything. The man was positioned on the landing below, facing the exterior stairwell door, which meant he had his back to her when she came through. He heard the door open and started to turn, and she said calmly and without particular urgency, "Don't." He turned anyway. People in her experience almost always turned anyway. What happened in the next 11 seconds was not something that Sina would ever fully describe to anyone who asked, because the truth was that it happened faster than description allows, and it required the kind of physical vocabulary that takes years to build. What the cameras in the stairwell captured, and they would review this footage many times in the days that followed, was a sequence of precise economical movements that left a 210-pound man sitting against the stairwell wall, with his hands zip-tied behind him using a zip tie she had taken from his own vest pocket, and a nurse standing in the landing above him, not breathing hard, not shaking, looking down at him with an expression that was neither triumphant nor angry. "You're going to be okay," she told him. "The zip ties are tight, but not tight enough to cut off circulation. Someone will be here for you shortly." He stared up at her. He had a cut above his eye from where he had connected with the wall, and blood was tracking down the side of his face in a thin line, and his expression was something she had seen before on the faces of men who had underestimated something and were only now realizing the full depth of their error. "Who are you?" he said. She had been asked that question before, in different countries and different languages, in moments that made this one look like a minor inconvenience. She had given different answers in different contexts, but they all meant the same thing. "I'm the night nurse," she said, and went back through the door. The third man, the one at the nurse's station, was still in position when she came back into the main corridor. He had heard enough by now to know that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the plan, but he didn't know where the problem had come from, and that uncertainty was eating him alive. She could see it in his posture from 30 feet away, the way his shoulders were riding up toward his ears, the way his head was moving too fast on its swivel covering too much ground at once, without settling on anything. He was a professional, but he was a professional who understood that his entire operation had just collapsed. And professionals, when the plan falls apart, tend to make one of two choices. They either freeze or they escalate. She was betting on escalate. She was right. He turned and saw her in the corridor, ivy pole still in her hand, walking toward him at that same measured pace that had puzzled Darnell Webb for 2 years, and his gun came up fast. "Stop," he said. "Stop right there." She stopped, 20 feet between them. "Drop that," he said, meaning the pole. She considered it. Then she set it down against the wall carefully without hurry. "On the ground," he said. "Hands." "You're out of time," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Your team is contained. Your coordinator lost comms 6 minutes ago. There are 4 federal marshals in this building and more coming because when the floor power went out, it triggered a security protocol that sent an automatic alert to the Federal Protection Detail." She watched him process this. "You have maybe 3 minutes before this building becomes somewhere you cannot leave from. And right now, the only leverage you have is how cooperative you are in the next 60 seconds. He stared at her. "Who are you?" he said. From down the hall from room 305, Frank Kowalski's door opened. Frank stood in the doorway, his IV line still attached, and he looked at the man with the gun, and then he looked at Sina, and something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, but a deep, settling recognition. "Son," Frank said to the man with the gun, "you have made a serious mistake tonight, and the woman standing between us is the reason I know exactly how serious it is." The man's gun hand was trembling slightly. "Not much. Enough." "Put it down," Sina said. "Please." The please was genuine. She was not being sarcastic. She had never enjoyed this part, the moment when someone had to make a decision that would define the rest of their life, and she had to stand there and wait for them to make it. There's still a way through this that doesn't make everything worse. From below, somewhere in the building, she could hear boots on stairs. Real boots, federal level. The protection detail had mobilized. The man's gun hand dropped 3 inches, then 6, then all the way. He set the weapon on the floor. Sina was at his side in 4 steps, the weapon secured and set beyond reach, her hand on his shoulder, not gripping, just present as the sound of the federal response team hit the stairwell doors. Darnell Webb came out from behind the nurse's station desk on shaking legs, Casey Huang right behind him, and they both stood in the red-lit corridor and looked at Sina. Just looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment because there wasn't language adequate to the moment, or at least not language that either of them had been trained to reach for in a situation like this. Finally, Darnell said, "Sina." "Yeah," she said. "What?" He stopped, started again. "What just happened?" She picked up the IV pole from where she had leaned it against the wall. She straightened her scrubs. She looked at the man sitting on the floor at the corridor where two other men were now secured at the federal agents beginning to pour through the stairwell door with weapons raised and protocols activated. "I did my job," she said. And then because there were patients on this floor who had not asked to be woken by the sound of chaos, and because their vitals still needed checking, and their medication schedules still needed to be honored, and because the work that mattered most was the work that kept going, even when everything else stopped, Sina Matafa tucked the pole back in the corner of the medication room, washed her hands at the sink, and went back to her rounds. The federal agents moved through the third floor like water filling a container, fast complete, leaving no space unchecked. They came in with weapons raised and voices clipped in the kind of organized urgency that told Sina they had been staged somewhere close, probably in the parking structure across the street, waiting on the protection detail's alert signal. She had been right about the timeline. She was usually right about timelines. What she had not anticipated was Special Agent Donna Reyes. Reyes came through the stairwell door 40 seconds after her team, which meant she had let them clear the corridor first, which meant she was either cautious or experienced or both. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the kind of face that did not arrange itself into unnecessary expressions. She looked at the man sitting on the floor with his hands behind his back. She looked at the IV pole leaning against the medication room wall. She looked at Darnell Webb, who was still standing in the middle of the corridor with the specific expression of someone who had witnessed something that had not yet fully processed into language. And then her eyes found Sina, who was at the end of the hall, completing her notation on Walter Bream's overnight chart. "That's the nurse," Darnell said, pointing. His voice had a quality to it that Reyes would later describe in her report as stunned reverence, which was not a phrase she typically used in official documentation, but which she felt was the most accurate available option. Reyes walked the length of the corridor without hurrying. She stopped 6 feet from Sina. She looked at the chart in Sina's hands. She looked at Sina's face. "You want to tell me what happened up here?" Reyes said. 3 intruders, third floor north stairwell access at approximately 11:22. They cut the primary power at the floor breaker before entry. Sina turned the chart page without looking up. 2 are in the south stairwell and the north corridor respectively. Third surrendered near the nurse's station. All 3 are physically intact. No injuries to staff or patients. Reyes stared at her. "And you know this how?" "Because I contained them." A pause. "You. Me." Reyes turned slowly and looked down the corridor again at the man on the floor, at the 2 agents now radioing in from the stairwells at Casey Huang still sitting behind the nurse's desk with her hands pressed flat against her thighs like she was trying to hold herself to the earth. Then she turned back. "You're a nurse," Reyes said. "I am," Sina agreed. "On a VA floor. Third floor, 14 patients. I'm 3 charts behind because of the interruption. So if you don't need me for the next 20 minutes. "I need you right now," Reyes said. Her voice had sharpened not with anger, but with the focused intensity of someone who had just identified the most important variable in the room and intended to understand it fully. "Who are you?" It was the 3rd time someone had asked her that question tonight. Sina set the chart in its slot and turned to face Reyes completely. "Sina Matafa," she said. "RN night shift. 4 years at this facility." Before that, the hallway went quiet in a particular way. Even the monitors seemed to settle into a lower register. Darnell was watching from the nurse's station. Frank Kowalski had come to his doorway again, my IV pole in tow, and was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching Sina with an expression that had something almost proprietary in it, like a man watching someone else describe something he already knew the truth of. Sina met Reyes's eyes and held them. "I think," she said, "that's a conversation for a different room." Reyes nodded once, and the nod said, "I agree. And also, I am going to get everything out of you before this night is over," and Sina understood that and accepted it as reasonable. She had known this was coming from the moment she picked up the IV pole. You could not put 3 trained men on the floor in under 15 minutes without someone asking questions about your resume. Reyes gestured toward the family consultation room and at the end of the hall. The small room with the round table and the box of tissues that nobody ever touched, and the window that looked out over the parking lot. Sina followed her in. Reyes closed the door. Start from the beginning, Reyes said. Define beginning, Sina said. Reyes pulled out a chair and sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table. She looked at Sina with the patient, immovable focus of someone who had spent 2 decades extracting information from people who did not want to give it. Sina Matafa, she said. I'm going to run your name in the next 10 minutes, regardless of what you tell me. So you can talk to me now informally and we can have a conversation. Or you can wait, and when your file comes back, I'm going to have a lot more specific questions and a lot less flexibility about how I ask them. Sina sat down across from her. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at the window for a moment, not at anything outside it, just at the gas, and then she looked back at Reyes. 11 years Army, she said. Special Forces, 75th Ranger Regiment, then an attached medic role with a unit I am not going to name in this room or any other room without written authorization from a very specific office in Arlington. She paused. 3 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq, 1 that isn't on any map you have access to. Honorable discharge medical separation 4 years ago. Reyes did not move, but something in her face shifted in the way that things shift when a person receives information that recontextualizes everything they thought they understood about a situation. Medical separation, Reyes said. Shrapnel, left side, it's handled. Sina's voice was flat and factual, the voice she used for clinical information. I can do this job. I've been doing this job. As a nurse? Was a nurse. With a special forces background that apparently includes close quarters combat capability sufficient to neutralize 3 tactical operatives using hospital equipment. IV pole, Sina said, and nerve pressure, and the element of surprise which they forfeited by assuming the night nurse was not going to be a problem. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly through her nose. People have underestimated you before, she said. Consistently, Sina said. It stopped bothering me a long time ago. Outside the consultation room, the floor was coming back to full light. Someone had restored power. She could hear the primary overheads flicking back on the deeper hum of the building returning to its normal register. She could hear agents moving through the corridor, the particular sound of equipment being bagged and documented. She thought about Walter Bream in room 302 and hoped the commotion hadn't spiked his cardiac readings. She thought about Frank Kowalski in 305 and felt a cold, specific worry that had nothing to do with tonight's 3 men and everything to do with the person who had sent them. The medication order, she said. The one I flagged on Kowalski's chart 3 days ago. Reyes looked at her carefully. What about it? It wasn't a clerical error. Someone altered it deliberately. Someone with system access. I reported it to Dr. Harris, who overrode my flag and documented it as a nursing misread. She watched Reyes's face. I want to know if that's being investigated. Reyes said nothing for 2 full seconds. Why do you ask? Because the men tonight were the blunt instrument, Sina said. And blunt instruments come after the quiet methods have been tried. Someone tried to kill Frank Kowalski slowly and carefully, and it didn't work. Tonight was the contingency. She leaned forward slightly. Which means whoever is running this had access to this hospital's medical records system before tonight, and that person is still here. The room went very still. Reyes picked up her radio. What happened in the next 30 minutes happened fast and in pieces the way things always happen when an investigation suddenly pivots and everyone has to run to catch up with the new direction. Reyes made 3 calls. Sina heard parts of them through the consultation room door, which Reyes had left cracked when she stepped into the hall, either because she trusted Sina or because she wanted Sina to hear. 2 of the calls were to federal offices. The 3rd was to someone Reyes addressed only as director, and the conversation was short and had the compressed quality of an exchange between people who had worked together long enough to communicate in shorthand. When Reyes came back in, her face had changed, not dramatically, but the edges of it had tightened in a way that told Sina the conversation had confirmed something unpleasant. The medication alteration, Reyes said sitting back down, was logged under a physician's access code. The code belongs to Dr. Bret Harris. Sina did not say I told you. She did not say anything for a moment. She thought about Harris's face at the nurse's station counter that evening, the clipboard hitting the surface, the pens scattering the voice that carried down the entire hallway. She thought about the way he had said Matafa is a night nurse, the specific contempt in it, the kind of contempt that had always felt slightly overcalibrated for what it was describing, like a man trying to convince himself of something he needed to believe. He overrode my flag, she said. Yes. And then he documented it as a nursing misread. Yes. so that if Kowalski died and anyone looked back at the chart, the record would show that a night nurse had misread a dosage and the attending physician had corrected it. That's the working theory. Reyes watched her. You flagged it anyway. I put a physical note in the paper chart backup, Sina said. The one nobody looks at because everything's digital now. Old habit. She paused. I also photographed it. Reyes stared at her. On my personal phone, Sina said, the day I flagged it, before Harris overrode the entry. The silence in the room had a different quality now. It was the silence of a case that had just cracked open in a direction that changed everything. I need that photograph, Reyes said. I know, Sina. Sina said, I'll send it to whatever number you give me. Reyes gave her the number. Sina sent the photograph. They both looked at Reyes's phone as the image came through a clear time-stamped photo of a printed chart page with a dosage entry circled in Sina's handwriting and the words, check this initialed at the bottom. Reyes set the phone down on the table. How long have you suspected Harris? She said. I suspected the chart alteration 3 days ago, Sina said. I didn't connect it to Harris until he overrode my flag personally instead of sending it through the pharmacy review committee the way protocol requires. That's when I knew it wasn't administrative. She paused. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough. Enough for what? Enough for me to start paying closer attention. Reyes leaned back in her chair. She studied Sina with the expression of someone who was recalibrating rapidly the categories she had initially placed things in. You spent 3 days watching this floor, she said. I spent 3 nights, Sina said. I work nights. Watching for what? For whatever came after the quiet method failed. And tonight was what came after. From outside the consultation room through the cracked door, a voice came down the hall. Darnell's voice higher than usual and strained at the edges. Where's Sina Reyes? Somebody needs to get Sina. Sina was on her feet before Reyes finished standing. She pushed through the consultation room door and into the corridor, and she saw Darnell at the nurse's station with his hand on the phone and his face carrying the specific kind of distress that she had learned to recognize as different from shock. This was active alarm, the kind generated by something currently happening rather than something already survived. What? She said. Room 302, Darnell said. Walter Bream, his monitor just spiked. Cardiac event. She was already moving. She hit room 302 at a pace that was not quite running because you did not run in a hospital corridor unless the alternative was catastrophic, but it was the absolute upper limit of what did not qualify as running. And she pushed through the door and was at Walter Bream's bedside in 4 seconds. He was awake, barely his eyes at half-mast and his lips pressed together in the grimace of a man working very hard not to show how much pain he was in. The monitor above his bed was spiking in a pattern she recognized immediately. Walter, she said. Walter, look at me. His eyes came up. You're having an arrhythmia. It's not a full cardiac event, but your heart is irritated, and we need to calm it down. Can you hear me? I can hear you, he managed, loud and clear. Good. I need you to breathe with me. Slow in, slow out. What the hell was all that noise, he said, even as he was trying to follow her breathing. Sounded like somebody was fighting in my hallway. Somebody was, she said honestly. It's handled. You handle it. Walter breathed. I'm breathing. Did you handle it? She had his wrist now, 2 fingers on his pulse eyes on the monitor, the other hand already reaching for the crash cart to pull the defibrillator to a ready position, just in case the rhythm went somewhere worse. I handled it, she said. He exhaled. Something in his shoulders released. Good, he said. Figured it was you. You had got that sound. She looked at him. What sound? Quiet sound, he said, like things stopping. He closed his eyes. Vietnam, we had a guy, medic, moved the same way you do, never made noise. Things just stopped happening when he showed up. She held his wrist and watched the monitor and said nothing because there was nothing to say to that, or rather there was too much to say, and none of it belonged in this room at this moment, with this man whose heart was slowly, incrementally finding its way back to a normal rhythm. It took 11 minutes. 11 minutes of her standing at his bedside, steady and present, while his heart argued with itself and then gradually conceded. When the monitor settled into a consistent pattern, she adjusted his oxygen, noted the event in his chart, and stood up straight. You're okay, she said. I know, he said. You were here. She left the room and closed the door quietly behind her, and she stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds, her allotment the same one she always gave herself, and then she put it somewhere it couldn't reach her and kept going. Reyes was waiting in the hallway with 2 agents and a face that had reorganized itself around a new development. Harris isn't in the building, she said. We pulled his keycard log. He badged out of the physician parking entrance at 11:07, 15 minutes before the incursion. He knew the timeline, Sina said. He gave them the timeline. Reyes's jaw was tight, and the floor layout, and the breaker location. He's been in this building for 9 years, Matafa. He knows every square foot of it. Do you have him? We have a BOLO. He won't get far. Reyes paused. His access code was also used to pull Kowalski's protection detail schedule from the hospital security system, the one that shows the marshal rotation times, the gaps. Sina thought about that for a moment. He knew when the marshals would be on break, she said. 11 minutes twice a night staggered. The intruders came in during the second window. Reyes shook her head. This was meticulous. Harris spent weeks on this. He spent weeks on it, Sina said. And it fell apart in 15 minutes. Because of you. She didn't respond to that. She was already doing something with the information, processing it into a shape she could use. Something was still pulling at her, a thread she hadn't finished following. The medication alteration. Harris's access code. But access codes could be borrowed, could be given. She thought about the contractor Frank Kowalski was testifying against. She thought about the kind of money that bought 3 trained operators and a corrupted physician. That was not small money. That was not a local operation. The contractor, she said, the one Kowalski is testifying against. What's the name? Reyes studied her. That's an active federal case. I know. I can't, Reyes. She looked at her evenly. 3 men came into my hospital tonight with encrypted tactical radios. Harris gave them the blueprint, but someone gave Harris the order. And that someone is still operating, which means Kowalski is still a target. Tonight was one contingency. There will be another one. The hallway was quiet around them. Ich ran at the edges. The monitors beeped their steady, indifferent rhythms. Reyes exhaled. Aryan Medical Group, she said. Defense contractor out of Atlanta. VA contracts going back 8 years. Kowalski's testimony covers falsified quality reports on spinal implants. 17 veterans have had complications. 3 deaths. Sina was still. 17, she said, at minimum. In Harris. Harry did 7 spinal procedures in the last 2 years using Aryan implants. He reported 0 complications. Reyes paused. Kowalski's testimony would directly contradict those reports. The thread had finished unraveling. Harris wasn't just a man who had been paid to look the other way. He was a man with his own liability in the outcome of the trial, his own exposure, his own reason to want Frank Kowalski to stop existing before the testimony date. The payment from Aryan was real, almost certainly, but it was secondary to the fear. Harris had been protecting himself as much as the contractor. He's not going to run, she said. Reyes looked at her sharply. What? Running is what innocent people do when they panic. Harris isn't innocent, and he isn't panicking. She turned to look down the corridor toward Frank Kowalski's room. He's going to try to finish it. Because if Kowalski testifies, Harris goes to prison. Running just delays the timeline. He needs this to not happen. We have marshals on the floor. You have the same rotation schedule that Harris already compromised. Sina said, change it. Right now, double the coverage and change the rotation to something that wasn't in the system before tonight. Reyes was already on the radio. Sina started walking toward room 305. Frank Kowalski was sitting up in bed when she came in. He looked considerably more alert than he had any right to look given the evening he'd had, but she supposed that men who had survived what he had survived developed a certain tolerance for crisis. He watched her come in, and he did not say anything until she had checked his IV line and looked at his monitor and satisfied herself that his heart was doing what it was supposed to be doing. Harris, Frank said. Yes, Sina said. 9 years, Frank said. 9 years that man is in this building treating veterans. He said it with a flatness that had something burning underneath it, the way a controlled fire looks calm from a distance and is anything but up close. I came here because I thought I'd be safe. Federal protection detail, controlled facility, no public record of my admission. He shook his head, and the doctor was already bought. You're safe now. Am I? She met his eyes. I'm here, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The same look he had given her in that corridor when everything was still in motion, that assessing look, the one that took the measure of a person. But this time there was something different in it. Less measuring, more certain. My daughter is a Marine, he said. 2nd lieutenant. She has that same thing you have. That thing where she gets quieter when things get bad. He paused. I used to think it was frightening. That kind of quiet. Most people do. I don't anymore, he said. Not tonight. From the corridor, Reyes's voice carried through the door, crisp and directive, rerouting the protection detail's rotation pattern. From somewhere below them in the lower floors of the building, Sina could hear the distant, organized sounds of law enforcement establishing a full perimeter. The building was locked. The exits were covered. 3 men were in federal custody, and somewhere out in the Nashville night, Brett Harris was making a decision about his next move. Sina thought about that decision. She thought about the shape of a man's desperation when he understood that the door he had been counting on was no longer there. She thought about what a man like that reached for when the careful plan was gone and only the blunt options remained. She thought about the parking structure across the street where the federal staging area had been. She thought about Harris's keycard swipe at 11:07. She thought about the 15-minute gap between when he left and when the team came in, and what a man with 9 years of knowledge of this building would do with 15 minutes and a reason to stay close. Her body understood something before her mind finished forming the thought. She moved to the window. She looked out. The parking structure was 200 meters away, 6 stories open-sided concrete. At this distance, in this light, she could not see detail, but she could see a shape on the 4th level, a stillness in a place where nothing should be still, and her chest tightened with the cold, specific recognition of a woman who had spent years learning what deliberate concealment looked like from across a distance. She stepped back from the window. "Get away from the bed," she said to Kowalski. Her voice was very quiet. He moved without asking why. That was the thing about men who had served. They heard that tone, and they responded to it before the explanation arrived. She hit the corridor at speed. "Reyes," she said, and Reyes turned from 30 feet away and read something in Sina's face that made her take 3 steps forward before Sina finished the sentence. "Parking structure, 4th level, possible shooter position. Get your people on it now and get Kowalski's room window covered." Reyes was on the radio before the last word was out. Sina was already calculating distances. 200 meters, 4th level, angle of elevation relative to room 305. She thought about what kind of equipment a man like Harris would have access to through a defense contractor with 8 years of VA contracts and money enough to buy 3 tactical operators on 12 hours notice. She thought about 17 veterans with spinal complications and 3 deaths. She thought about the men on this floor in their beds, Walter Bream and his arrhythmia and his crackers, and Frank Kowalski with his IV pole and his daughter who was a Marine, and 11 others who had come here because they needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere that would take care of them the way the country had stopped taking care of them a long time ago. She felt in that moment not fear, not adrenaline, something older and quieter than both of those things. Something that had been with her since Afghanistan, since the first time she had understood what it meant to be the only thing standing between the people she was responsible for and the thing that was coming for them. She went back to her patients. That was the job. That had always been the job. Not the part where you fought, the part where you stayed. The call came back in 4 minutes. Reyes pushed through the door of room 307, where Sina was checking the IV line on a 63-year-old man named Raymond Torres, who had slept through the entire night's events with the profound, medicated unconsciousness of a man on post-surgical pain management. Sina had turned his monitor volume down when the chaos started and back up now that things had stilled, and she was noting his respiration rate when Reyes appeared in the doorway with her radio in one hand and her phone in the other, and the look on her face of someone who had just confirmed something they were hoping was wrong. "Parking structure," Reyes said. 4th level, we found a position, rifle case empty, spent shell casing, single position pre-staged." She paused. "He was already up there, Matafa, before the team even came in." Sina set the chart down. So the 3 men were a distraction, or a primary attempt with a secondary option already in place. Reyes stepped further into the room, lowering her voice, even though Torres was not going to hear anything short of a thunderclap. If the team failed to reach Kowalski, Harris was going to take the shot himself from across the street. "Did he fire?" "No, we think your call to cover the window interrupted the shot window. By the time he had a lane again, our people were on the structure." "Did you get him?" Reyes's jaw tightened. He was gone, left the rifle, ran on foot through the structure to the adjacent parking level, and got into a vehicle we're still identifying. Traffic cameras on the block have a partial plate. Sina absorbed this. She looked at Raymond Torres's monitor, steady, consistent, unbothered. She looked at the window in this room which faced north rather than west, away from the parking structure. She thought about Harris running. She thought about what a man runs toward when he runs away from a failed plan and a burning bridge, and the knowledge that 3 men in federal custody could put him at the center of everything. "He has a second location," she said, "probably, and a second option. Reyes looked at her. We're operating on that assumption. Then Kowalski doesn't leave this floor, Sina said. Not for tests, not for any procedure, not for anything that takes him out of a controlled environment where you have eyes on every entry point. She paused. And I want to know who else on this staff had access to his chart, not just physician-level access. Anyone. That's already being pulled. Pull it faster. Reyes looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who was not accustomed to being given directives by people who were not in her chain of command, and who was also in this particular instance not inclined to argue about it. She went back into the hallway. Sina finished Torres's chart. She moved to the next room. She kept moving because the work did not stop and the patients did not stop needing her simply because the night had turned into something else. And the discipline of continuing was the thing that kept her from going somewhere in her head that would not be useful to anyone. It was Darnell who found her in the linen supply room 17 minutes later, where she had gone to retrieve fresh blankets for a patient who had kicked us off in the night. He came through the door with the energy of a man who had too much to say and too little architecture for it. Sina, he said. Darnell. I don't even know where to start. Start with whatever is most urgent, she said, pulling a folded blanket from the shelf. Okay, he exhaled. First, are you okay? She turned to look at him. It was a genuine question, the kind that deserved a genuine answer. And Darnell Webb was one of the few people at this hospital for whom she had ever manufactured anything close to genuine. Yes, she said, I'm okay. Because what I watched you do in that hallway. He stopped. His hands were moving in the way hands move when the body is trying to express something that words have not yet organized. Sina, I've worked with you for 2 years, and I had no idea. I know. You could have told me. No, she said, I couldn't. He was quiet for a moment processing that. Then Special Forces. Yes. Afghanistan. Among other places. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at her. Okay, he said. Okay, second thing. Casey is in the break room and she hasn't stopped shaking since the lights came back on, and I don't know what to do with that. Sit with her, Sina said. Don't try to fix it, just sit there. Sometimes that's the only thing that helps. And third thing, his voice dropped. There's a man downstairs, lobby level, showed up 20 minutes ago, says he's from the hospital administration. Director Callum Walsh. He's asking for a full briefing, and he specifically asked for the name of the nurse who, quote, handled the situation on the 3rd floor. Sina stilled. How did he hear about it? She said. That's what I thought. Darnell's eyes were steady on hers. Federal response shows up, locks down the building, 3 men in custody, and the hospital director is here in 30 minutes asking about the nurse by name. At midnight. The blanket was in her hands. She held it without moving for a moment. Callum Walsh had been director of the Nashville 5A Medical Center for 6 years. She knew his name from the departmental memos, from the budget announcements, from the employee satisfaction surveys that circulated twice a year, in which she dutifully completed, in which she suspected nobody read. She had never spoken to him directly. Night shift nurses rarely intersected with hospital administration, which was its own kind of institution operating on a schedule that assumed the world ran on daylight. 6 years. Harris had been in the building for 9. Tell Reyes, she said. Already did, Darnell said. That's why I came to find you. She wants to know if Walsh's name means anything to you. It did and it didn't, and the difference between those two things mattered enormously right now. Walsh's name was on the Aryan Medical Group contract renewals. She knew this because she had read everything she could find about Kowalski's case in the 3 days since she had noticed the chart alteration, the way she had always read everything available before going into any situation, a habit from years of preparation in places where the unprepared did not get second chances. Walsh's signature was on the contract documents. That was a matter of public record. Whether his signature was just administrative compliance or something more deliberate was a question nobody had thought to ask yet. She was thinking it now. She dropped the blanket back on the shelf. Where is Reyes Chironisham? Nurse's station. She was already moving past him into the corridor. Reyes was at the station with 2 agents and her phone pressed to her ear, and she looked up when Sina came toward her with a particular kind of directional intent that had already, over the course of this night, come to mean that something needed to happen immediately. Sina said, Walsh's name is on the Aryan contract renewals, at least the last 3 cycles. I need you to tell me whether that's routine administrative procedure or whether he had a personal relationship with anyone at the company. Reyes took the phone from her ear. She looked at Sina. Then she said into the phone, I need a financial background pull on Callum Walsh, director of Nashville Medical Center. Yes, tonight. Now. She hung up. How did you know about the contract renewals? I looked. When? 3 days ago. Reyes was quiet for a moment. You've been building a case file, she said, not a question. I've been doing my job, Sina said. And my job is to make sure my patients are safe. Kowalski is my patient. You're a nurse. You keep saying that like it's a limitation. Reyes looked at her, and something in the federal agent's face shifted towards something that was not quite a smile but was in its neighborhood. Downstairs, she said. Walsh is in the lobby. I need to decide how to handle that before he talks to anyone on this floor. Don't let him come up, Sina said immediately. If he's clean, it doesn't matter. If he's not, then giving him access to this floor tonight is handing him information he will immediately use. Agreed. Reyes was already gesturing to one of her agents. Keep him in the lobby. Comfortable, cooperative, but down there. The agent moved toward the elevator. Reyes turned back. In the meantime, the floor's double doors swung open, not from the elevator, from the stairwell. And it was not Walsh. It was a woman Sina had never seen before, late 30s, professional clothes lanyard around her neck, with a VA administrative badge moving with the slightly too controlled pace of someone who had been told to appear calm. She stopped when she saw Reyes's agents at the nurse's station, and her eyes went to Sina, and the look lasted a half-second too long. Ma'am, one of the agents said, stepping forward, this floor is restricted. I need to see your credentials. I'm Dr. Patricia Vance, the woman said, and her voice was steady, professional, the voice of someone who had prepared what they were going to say. I'm the on-call hospitalist. I received a page about a critical patient on this floor. Which patient? The agent said. A pause, small, controlled, almost invisible. Frank Kowalski, she said, room 305. Sina said, who paged you? Dr. Vance looked at her. I'm sorry, who paged you? Which staff member sent the page? It came through the system automatically. When a patient's monitor reaches a critical threshold, Kowalski's monitor hasn't reached any threshold tonight, Sina said. She had been watching it. She had been watching all of them. It's been stable since 11:30. There was no automated page. She looked at Reyes. There was no page. Reyes had her hand on her radio before Sina finished. The agent who had been advancing on Vance stepped forward another pace. Vance's composure held for exactly 2 seconds longer than it should have, which was how Sina knew it was composure and not genuine confusion, because genuinely confused people started asking questions, and Vance had stopped asking them. I think there may have been a mistake, Vance said, starting to step back toward the stairwell door. Stay where you are, please, the agent said. Vance stopped. Your badge, Reyes said, crossing the floor. Can I see it? The badge was real. The credential was real. Sina could see that from where she was standing, the legitimate VA hologram, the proper format, the correct department designation. But something was wrong with it in a way that took her another 3 seconds to identify. The badge showed an expiration date of the following month, which meant it was new, which meant Dr. Patricia Vance had received new credentials recently, which meant someone had processed those credentials for her, someone with administrative access to the credentialing system. Walsh. Reyes, Sina said. I see it, Reyes said. She had the badge in her hand, and she was looking at the back of it, at the micro print on the magnetic strip housing that only someone who had handled a lot of identification documents would know to look for. What happened next moved faster than the sequence in the hallway had, which said something about how the threat level had evolved over the course of the night. Vance reached for something at her waist, not a weapon, a phone, and the agent was on her wrist before it cleared her jacket pocket, and there was a brief, sharp struggle of the kind that happens when someone who is not a trained fighter tries to complete a single action against someone who is, which ended with Vance against the wall and the phone on the floor. The agent looked at the phone. It was locked. The last action visible on the screen, the push notification that had come through before it locked, was a text message from a number with no contact name that said floor status. She had been sent to assess, not to treat Kowalski, to determine whether the floor was still accessible, to report back, to Harris. Reyes looked at the phone. She looked at Vance. She said in a voice that had gone very flat and very cold, Is he in the building? Vance said nothing. Is Harris in this building right now? Silence. Sina turned and looked at the length of the corridor. She thought about what she knew. Harris had abandoned the rifle position in the parking structure. He had a partial plate on his vehicle, which meant he had another vehicle staged, or he had never intended to use that vehicle past a certain point. He was a man who had planned this with weeks of precision, a man who had inside access to this building's every system, a man who knew the rotation schedules, the staff patterns, the layout of every floor, the location of every camera. He was also a man who was out of options. That was the most dangerous kind. She said, Where are the maintenance corridors on this floor? Reyes looked at her sharply. What? The building maintenance corridors, the access behind the utility rooms. Does Harris have the building schematic? She already knew the answer. 9 years. He had walked every inch of this building. He knew the maintenance corridors the way he knew his own surgery suite. He doesn't need the main stairwell, she said. He doesn't need the elevator. He doesn't need a key card if he knows which access panels open from the inside. She was already moving toward the utility room at the far end of the corridor. Reyes said into her radio, I need every maintenance access point on the 3rd floor locked or covered right now. And then to Sina's back, Matafa, wait. Sina pushed through the utility room door. The room was narrow and smelled of industrial cleaner and the particular dry heat of mechanical systems. At the back, a metal panel. Not a door, a panel the kind set flush into the wall that most people would mistake for an electrical housing cover, was seated at an angle that was wrong by about a 1/4 inch. She had passed this utility room 4 nights a week for 4 years, and she knew the panel the way she knew every fixed element of her environment because noticing fixed elements was something she had never stopped doing, regardless of how domestic the setting. The panel was ajar. She stood to one side of it. She put her back to the wall. She thought about what was behind that panel, a maintenance corridor 4 feet wide, running between the floor's outer wall and the room infrastructure used by facilities staff for cable and pipe access. She thought about what was at the other end of the maintenance corridor, which she had seen once when a pipe had burst, and she had walked the staff through to the auxiliary exit. She thought about what a man who knew this building could do with that corridor. She thought about Frank Kowalski. She thought about room 305 at the other end of that corridor. She pushed the panel. The corridor was dark beyond it. Not pitch dark. There were emergency lights, the same red wash that had covered the main hall earlier. And by that light, she could see the shape of the corridor running toward the far end of the floor, could see the pipes and conduit along the walls, and could see at a distance of perhaps 40 feet the back of a man standing at another panel. Standing very still, with his hand on the panel that opened into the corridor directly opposite room 305. She did not say his name. She did not announce herself. She said very quietly into the specific quality of stillness that was in the corridor, "Don't open that panel." The man went rigid. "Bret," she said, still quiet. Always quietest when things were most serious. "Turn around." Harris turned around slowly. She had seen his face before in the hallways at the nurse's station, in the brief and contemptuous glance he had directed at her on dozens of occasions over 4 years. She had never seen it the way it looked now. The professional composure was entirely gone. What was under it was not villainy, which was what she had expected, but something rawer and more recognizable than that. It was the face of a man who had run out of everything, out of plans, out of time, out of the story he had been telling himself about who he was and why what he was doing was justified. He was still in his street clothes from when he had badged out at 11:07. He had something in his right hand, not a firearm, a syringe. She looked at it. She looked at him. "That's not going to work," she said. "You don't know what's in it," he said. His voice was the most unsettled thing about him, the one element that had come fully loose from its moorings. "Doesn't matter. You're not getting through that panel. You can't stop me." But even as he said it, the conviction was not in his voice. Something else was. "You're a night nurse. Bret, you change bedpans," he said, and his voice cracked on it, slightly cracked, in the way voices crack when the thing being said is the last defense against something enormous, and the person saying it already knows it isn't going to hold. "You check vitals, you don't—" "I was Special Forces," she said. 11 years, 3 tours, Afghanistan. I have been in rooms darker and smaller than this, with people who wanted to do worse things than you do, and I am still here, and those people were not." She paused. "Put the syringe down." He stared at her. "Bret, you're a doctor. You know what's on the other side of this. The 3 men you sent into this building tonight are in federal custody. Vance is in federal custody. Your access code is on the chart alteration. Your key card puts you leaving this building 15 minutes before the incursion. The rifle position in the parking structure is on camera." She took one step forward. "There is no outcome where you finish this tonight that does not end in a federal maximum security prison. The only variable left is whether you do something in the next 60 seconds that makes everything worse." The syringe was shaking in his hand. It was shaking because his hand was shaking, and his hand was shaking because the body, unlike the mind, cannot sustain the pretense that everything is under control when everything has in fact collapsed entirely. 17 veterans, she said. Her voice was different now. Still quiet, but the thing underneath it had changed. There was no tactics in it anymore, no calculation, just the truth, which was sometimes the sharpest instrument available. 17 of my patients, people like the ones on this floor right now, trying to sleep, trying to get through the night. 3 of them died, Bret. 3 of them went into surgery on spinal implants you knew were defective, and they died, and you filed reports that said everything was fine. He stopped. You don't understand what. I understand exactly what it was, she said. It was money, and it was fear, and then it was more money and more fear, and then it became tonight. She took another step. She was 20 feet from him. How long did you tell yourself it wasn't your fault? He didn't answer that. He couldn't. The syringe dropped to his side, not released, but lowered like the weight of it had suddenly become more than he could hold at that angle. Kowalski is going to testify, she said. You cannot stop that. The only thing you can do right now, the one single thing that makes any difference to how the rest of your life goes, is to walk out of this corridor and tell Reyes everything you know about Aryan Medical Group. She paused. Every name, every transaction, every instruction that came down from above your level, because there are people above your level in this, Bret, and they are the reason 17 veterans are carrying defective implants. And they are the reason you are standing in a maintenance corridor at midnight with a syringe in your hand, and they let you take all the risk while they sat in Atlanta and waited for their contract to be safe. The corridor was silent. Harris looked at the syringe in his hand. He looked at the panel that led to room 305. He looked at Sina, and something left him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a tide goes out slowly, continuously, until the ground underneath is exposed and there is no concealing what it was always made of. He set the syringe against the wall. He put his hands up. Sina let out the 4 seconds of breath. She stepped to the panel, access behind her, and pushed it open. Reyes was on the other side of it, with 2 agents in the kind of face that comes from monitoring a situation you cannot directly intervene in and trusting someone else to handle it, which she clearly found uncomfortable. He's clear, Sina said. The agents moved past her into the corridor. Harris did not resist. He did not speak. He walked with them with the particular slumped compliance of a man who has finished the most exhausting performance of his life and can no longer find the energy for the next line. Reyes watched him go. Then she looked at Sina. The syringe, Sina said. Get it to your lab team. You'll want to know what was in it. Reyes nodded. She was already on her radio. She walked alongside the agents as they brought Harris into the main corridor, and the last thing Sina heard before the utility room door swung shut was the specific clipped cadence of an arrest being formally made, rights being read, the legal architecture of accountability being constructed word by word in the fluorescent lit corridor of a hospital at 1 a.m. She stood in the utility room for a moment. Just a moment. The room smelled like cleaning solution and old copper pipe. The emergency light overhead was still red because nobody had fully restored all the secondary systems yet. She put her hand on the wall next to the panel. The metal was cool, and she held it there until the thing in her chest that had been locked in battle-ready tension for the last 2 hours began very slowly to release. 4 seconds. She gave it 4 seconds. Then she washed her hands at the utility sink and went back to her patients. Walter Bream was awake again when she came through room 302. Not in distress, his monitor was holding steady, but awake the way old men get awake in the deep middle of the night when the world has been loud and the body doesn't fully trust the quiet. You get him? He said. She looked at him. Get who? Whoever you were chasing. He shifted in his bed with the careful economy of a man managing his own discomfort. I heard the doors. I heard you moving. I know your walk, Matafa. Nobody else on this floor walks like that at that speed. Yes, she said. We got him. Walter was quiet for a moment. Harris, he said. She stopped noting his chart. How did you know that? 11 months on this floor, he said. Man never once looked me in the eye. Good doctors look you in the eye. Bad ones look at the chart. Harris always looked at the chart. He paused. Also, I wasn't completely asleep when you were talking in the hallway. She looked at him. You have exceptional hearing for a man on your medication. I have exceptional hearing for a man my age, he corrected. Vietnam. You learn to listen. His eyes clouded at their edges with age and fatigue were sharper in their centers than people usually credited. You're going to be okay too, he said, in case nobody said it. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the maintenance corridor. She thought about Harris's face when the pretense left it. She thought about 17 names she had never known and 3 families who had buried someone who should still be alive. Yeah, she said, I know. She finished his chart. She checked his oxygen. She moved the call button to where he could reach it without straining his shoulder. She went back into the corridor. Darnell was there waiting, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, and the specific look of a man who has decided that he is going to stand here until he gets an explanation that satisfies him regardless of how long that takes. Okay, he said, from the beginning, all of it. She almost smiled. She was too tired for a full smile, but something in the direction of one moved through her face. Not tonight, she said, then when? When there's time. Sina. Darnell. She looked at him directly. I need to finish my rounds. I have 11 patients who don't care about what happened tonight because they're asleep and their bodies are still doing what bodies do, which is require monitoring and care and somebody paying attention. I'm going to do that for the next 4 hours, and then I'm going to go home and sleep. She paused. And then if you still want to have this conversation, we can have it. He looked at her. He uncrossed his arms. He exhaled slowly. Casey needs to know if she's safe. She's safe. She needs to hear it from you. Not from me, not from the agents, from you. Sina nodded. I'll go to the break room when I finish Torres's chart. Thank you, he said. She started walking. Behind her, she heard Darnell moving too, back to the nurse's station, back to the work that continued regardless. And the sound of it, 2 sets of footsteps moving through the same corridor they had moved through 1,000 times before, settled something in her that she hadn't known needed settling. From the far end of the floor, she heard Reyes's voice, organized and commanding, directing the post-incident containment with the thoroughness of a woman who understood that tonight was not the end of anything, but the beginning of something much longer and more complicated. There would be testimony. There would be depositions. There would be questions about 11 years and 3 tours in a code name that she had not spoken aloud in 4 years and which had returned to her lips tonight with the same ease as every other muscle memory of her former life, easily, cleanly, like a language the body never stops speaking, even when the mind has decided it is done. She was at Torres's doorway when Reyes caught up with her. Matafa, she turned. Reyes stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand and her face carrying something that had not been there at the beginning of the night. It was not gratitude exactly. Reyes did not seem like a woman who led with gratitude, but it was adjacent to it in the way that professional respect sometimes sits in the same neighborhood as feeling without quite being it. Walsh, Reyes said, his financial disclosure is in. There are 7 wire transfers over 3 years from an Arion Medical Group subsidiary. Total just over $800,000, she paused. It was going to be the cleanest insider arrangement you've ever seen. Nobody would have found it without knowing where to look. But you found it, Sina said, because you told me to look at the contract renewals. Reyes held her gaze. Walsh is being picked right now, the director of this hospital in federal custody, because a night nurse told me to look at a contract document at 1 a.m. Sina said nothing. I'm going to need a full statement from you, Reyes said. Everything. Afghanistan, the chart alteration, what you observed in the 3 days before tonight. All of it. I know, Sina said, tomorrow. Tonight would be tomorrow, she said. My patients need me tonight. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. The nod was different from the ones earlier, not tactical, not procedural. It was the nod of one professional recognizing another across the boundaries of their respective disciplines. Tomorrow, Reyes said. Sina went in to check on Torres. Behind her, the 3rd floor of the Nashville VA Medical Center was very slowly, very carefully finding its way back to what it was supposed to be. Not the battlefield it had become tonight, not the compromised institution it had been for years, without anyone realizing, but what it had always meant to be at its foundation. A place where people who had given the hardest years of their lives came to be looked after by someone who knew what they needed and stayed through the night to make sure they got it. Sina moved through it the way she always moved through it, steady and present and quiet, and the monitors beeped their steady rhythms around her, and the building breathed. The sun came up the way it always did over Nashville, indifferent to what had happened the night before, pushing pale light through the east-facing windows of the 3rd floor and touching the edges of things without asking permission. Sina had been on her feet for 9 hours by the time the day shift arrived. She had not sat down once except for 20 minutes in the break room with Casey Huang, who had finally stopped shaking somewhere around 3 a.m. and had spent the remaining time alternating between silence and the kind of quiet, disjointed talking that people do when they are processing something that doesn't have a category yet. Sina had sat with her. She had not tried to fix it. She had done exactly what she told Darnell to do, and it had worked because it always worked because presence was the oldest medicine available and the most consistently underrated. The day shift nurses came in at 6:45 with their coffee cups and their handoff sheets and the normal energy of people arriving to a place they expected to find unchanged and instead found a floor that had been processed by a federal response team with evidence markers still visible in 3 locations and agents stationed at both stairwell entrances and the particular institutional residue of a serious incident that had not yet been fully explained to anyone below the supervisory level. The day shift charge nurse, a heavy-set woman named Gloria Marsh, who had been running day shifts at the VA for 14 years and who was not easily rattled, took one look at the corridor and then looked at Sina and said, "Brief me." Sina briefed her. She kept it clinical and sequential the way she reported everything, and Gloria listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Sina had always respected about her. When Sina finished, Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Kowalski, stable, resting. His protection detail has been reinforced and the rotation schedule has been updated. Harris, federal custody as of approximately 1:47 this morning. Walsh, same." Gloria looked at the corridor again. She looked at Sina's face, which after 9 hours and the kind of night it had been was carrying the specific blankness of extreme fatigue held in check by professional discipline. "Go home," Gloria said. "I need to finish the handoff." "I have the handoff. Go home, Matafa." Sina went to complete her final chart notes first because she was constitutionally incapable of leaving anything unfinished. And it was while she was standing at the nurse's station completing Raymond Torres's overnight record that Reyes appeared for the last time, that morning coat on phone in hand, looking like a woman who had also not slept, but who had metabolized the night differently, not in spite of it, but because of it, fueled by the particular energy of a major case that had just cracked wide open. "Walsh is talking," Reyes said without preamble. Sina set her pen down. "His attorney got there at 4 and advised him to cooperate fully, which means he's already given us 3 names at Arian Medical Group above his level of contact. The financial trail goes back 5 years. The implant falsification goes back further than that." Reyes paused. 17 veterans with complications. "We're now looking at 22. 22. Sina absorbed that number. She let it land. She did not look away from it the way some people looked away from numbers like that, because looking away was a choice that belonged to people who were not responsible for the ground the number stood on, and she had decided a long time ago that she was not one of those people. "The 3 men from last night," she said, "private contractors, former military, all 3. They were recruited through a security consulting firm that Arian uses for, quote, sensitive asset protection. The firm's already under a federal warrant." Reyes watched her. "They'll be charged with a federal list that starts with conspiracy to commit murder and goes from there. And Harris. Harris is the most interesting case," Reyes said, and her voice had a particular quality when she said it, the quality of something complicated being held at a professional distance. "He started as a recipient. Arian paid him well to use their implants and file clean reports. For 3 years, he told himself he was doing nothing wrong, that the implants were probably fine, that the VA procurement system was so broken anyway that someone had to work with the contractors that won the bids." She paused. "Then a veteran died, and then another one. And then Harris knew, and he kept filing clean reports because by then he was in so deep that the alternative was worse than continuing." "Fear," Sina said, the same words she had used in the maintenance corridor. "Fear," Reyes confirmed, "and money and the particular moral erosion that happens when a person makes a bad decision and then makes a worse one to protect the first one and then makes a catastrophic one to protect both of them." She shook her head. "He was a good surgeon once. His record from his first 4 years here is genuinely impressive. Then Arian came in with a contract offer and the math changed." Sina thought about that. She thought about what it meant to have started somewhere good and ended somewhere like a maintenance corridor at midnight with a syringe in your hand. She thought about the increments. She had seen it before in different contexts, different theaters, the way people walked away from themselves one small step at a time. Each step so small that it didn't feel like the direction was changing until they looked back and could no longer see where they started. "He's going to cooperate," she said, "fully. His attorney confirmed this morning. He understands what cooperation means for his timeline." Reyes paused. "He asked about you." Sina looked up. "Not aggressively," Reyes said. "He asked if you were all right." Those were his exact words. He asked if the nurse was all right. She held Sina's gaze. "I thought you should know." Sina said nothing for a moment. "Then is he—" Reyes considered that. "No," she said honestly. "But he's accounted for, which is probably the better metric right now." The conversation might have ended there, but it didn't, because at that moment the elevator opened and 3 people stepped out onto the 3rd floor who did not belong to the night's events and had not been part of any of it, but whose arrival immediately changed the texture of everything in the corridor. The first was a man in his 50s in a suit that said federal government rather than private sector, with a VA insignia on his lapel, and the careful, managed demeanor of someone who had been very thoroughly briefed in the car on the way over. The second was a woman Sina didn't recognize, also suited carrying a tablet. The third was a man Sina recognized immediately because she had seen his photograph multiple times in the documentation surrounding Frank Kowalski's case. His name was Deputy Inspector General Marcus Webb. No relation to Darnell, and he ran the VA's Office of Inspector General, which was the body responsible for investigating exactly the kind of corruption that had been operating in this hospital for 5 years. He looked at Reyes first. Then his eyes found Sina Thaw at the nurse's station, and he crossed the floor with the directness of a man who had identified the most important person in the room. "Nurse Matafa," he said. "Deputy IG Webb," she said. He stopped. He assessed her the way people had been assessing her all night. That recalibration, she had come to recognize the visible process of revising an assumption. "You know who I am," he said. "I know everyone connected to Kowalski's case," she said. "I've been following it since I flagged his chart." Webb looked at Reyes. Reyes said, "I told you." Webb looked back at Sina. "I'd like to talk to you," he said. "Formally. We're going to be conducting a full investigation of this facility's procurement practices, medical record systems, and administrative oversight going back 5 years. Your observations over the last 3 days, and frankly, your observations over the last 4 years as a staff member here, are going to be relevant." "I know," Sina said. "I'll make myself available. Today, if possible." "Tomorrow," she said. "I've been on shift for 9 hours." Webb blinked. Something almost like a smile moved across his face. "Of course," he said. "Tomorrow." She went to find Frank Kowalski before she left. He was awake, which did not surprise her. She suspected Frank Kowalski had not slept more than 3 consecutive hours at a stretch in years. He was sitting up in his bed with his arms folded, and the particular stillness of a man who had been doing a great deal of thinking in the hours since the night's events and had arrived somewhere definitive with the results. She came in and checked his monitor out of habit, and he watched her do it with the patient tolerance of a man who had long since made peace with the rituals of medical care. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you, Frank. I mean it kindly. You look like someone who just did something very hard." "I did several things very hard." "Harris," he said, "in custody." "Walsh, also in custody." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been sitting here since 4 in the morning," he said, "thinking about what it means that the man who was supposed to be keeping me safe was the one who told them how to find me." "The physician." "The director." He shook his head slowly. "I spent 22 years in the Army. I trusted institutions. I trusted the chain of command. I trusted that the structures we built actually meant something." "They do," Sina said. "Structures don't fail on their own. People make choices inside them." "Harris made choices." "Yes." "Walsh made choices." "Yes." "An Aryan medical group made choices that killed 22 of my people," he said, and his voice had the specific hard edge of a man who was going to testify, who had always been going to testify, and for whom last night had not weakened that resolve, but had tempered it into something harder and more permanent. "I was scared," he said, "before last night. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. Witness protection, federal detail. And I was still scared because I knew what I was up against, and I knew that money buys things that the law can't always move faster than." "Are you still scared?" she said. He looked at her. "No," he said, "not anymore." She understood that. She understood it the way she understood most things that did not require explanation completely from the inside. What he meant was that last night had shown him the shape of what was coming for him, and it had been survivable, and the thing that had survived it was standing at his bedside checking his IV line, which meant that the math had changed. "My daughter called," he said, as second lieutenant. "She'd been notified by the marshals. She wanted to know what happened." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that a nurse on the 3rd floor held the line." He paused. "She asked for your name." Sina did not say anything to that. "I gave it to her," he said. "I hope that's all right." "It's fine," she said. "She said she wants to write you a letter." "She doesn't have to do that." "No," he agreed, "but she's going to." He watched Sina straighten the IV line and update the chart. "What happens to you now?" he said. It was the question she had not been asking herself because the habit of her life was to operate in the present tense and let the future assemble itself from the decisions made there. But it was a fair question, and Frank Kowalski had earned fair answers. "Testimony," she said, "depositions, investigation. Probably a significant number of conversations with people I've never met who want to understand what I knew and when I knew it, and how I knew it. And after all that, she finished his chart. She set it in the slot. She looked at him directly. I come back here, she said, and do my job. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and it was the nod of a man who recognized a decision that had already been made a long time ago and was simply being stated out loud for the first time. She left. She took the elevator down. Gerald Pitts was still at the security desk. His shift didn't end until 7, and he looked up when she came through the lobby, and he did not say anything about the remaining federal agents, or the evidence tape on the stairwell door, or the vehicle still parked in the restricted zone outside. He just looked at her with the steady, uncomplicated warmth of a man who had greeted her the same way for 4 years. Coconut bread was good, he said. It always is, she said. You got a minute? She stopped. Because there's a man outside, Gerald said, his voice dropping to something more careful. Been sitting in his car for about 40 minutes. Black sedan. He's not federal. I've seen enough of those tonight to know the difference. He's not press either. He's just sitting there. Sina was still. Showed up about 20 minutes after the last federal vehicle cleared the entrance, Gerald said. I called it in to Agent Reyes's team. They say they've got eyes on him. He paused. But I thought you should know. She looked at the lobby doors. She could not see the sedan from this angle. She thought about Arian Medical Group, which was headquartered in Atlanta and had contracts not just with the Nashville VA, but with 11 other VA facilities across the Southeast. She thought about the 3 names Walsh had given to Reyes that morning, the ones above his level of contact. She thought about an organization with 8 years of federal contracts and money enough to have purchased a hospital director and a physician and 3 private contractors. 3 names. 3 names given so far by a man trying to reduce his own exposure, which meant there were more names. She thought about what Frank Kowalski's testimony represented to those names. She thought about the fact that this had not ended last night. Last night had been the chapter that closed, not the book. She looked at Gerald. Did Reyes' team run the plates? Came back registered to a rental company out of Atlanta, Gerald said. Atlanta. She pulled out her phone. She called Reyes. It rang twice. The sedan outside, she said. Atlanta rental. I see it, Reyes said. We've had eyes on it for 30 minutes. The driver ran when one of my agents approached on foot. We're tracking. A pause. Metafa. Go home. I mean it. We have this. Do you know how many names Walsh has left to give you? A pause. We're working through it. How many above his level in the Aryan structure? We don't know the full organization yet. Then you don't have this, she said. Not completely. You have the Nashville operation. Aryan is not a Nashville operation. Silence for a moment. Then I know that. And Kowalski's testimony date. 2 weeks out. 2 weeks is enough time to build another approach. Harris is done. Walsh is done. The 3 contractors are done. But the people who put all of them in motion are still making decisions from Atlanta. I know that too, Reyes said. Her voice was not defensive. It was the voice of someone who already understood the problem and was working it from multiple angles. Which is why I have a meeting at the federal building at 9 this morning with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the OIG, and the D. Oh, we're not a pause. Which I may not have gotten to as quickly without you tonight. Sina said nothing for a moment. Outside, she could hear the city waking up, traffic starting, the particular urban frequency of Nashville at 7 in the morning normal, and unaware. Your statement, Reyes said. Tomorrow, I need everything, all of it. I'll be there, Sina said. She hung up. Gerald was watching her with the careful, attentive expression of a man who had learned not to ask follow-up questions when Sina used that particular tone of voice, a lesson he had apparently absorbed efficiently in the last several hours. She looked at the lobby doors again. She thought about the sedan driver running when the agent approached. Running meant they were not there to engage. They were there to observe, to report back, which meant someone in Atlanta wanted to know the status of last night's operation and had sent someone to gather that information in person, which meant the communication channels they had been using were now considered compromised, which meant they were adapting. Adaptive was always the thing that required the most attention. Gerald, she said. Yeah. The nurse supervisor for day shift. You have her direct number? Gloria Marsh. Yeah, in the system. Call her, tell her I said to make sure nobody on the 3rd floor discusses Kowalski's discharge timeline with anyone from hospital administration today. Not until the OIG has swept the administrative records. Gerald looked at her. You think there's more of them? I think Walsh had a staff, she said, and some of that staff came to work this morning. He was already reaching for the phone. She went back upstairs. Not to her floor, Gloria had the floor. She went to the administrative level, the sixth floor, which she had visited twice in 4 years, and which had the particular ambient quality of institutional authority carpet instead of linoleum wood veneer on the counters, instead of laminate, a different species of silence. The administrative assistant at the front desk looked up with the mild surprise of someone unaccustomed to seeing scrubs on this level. "I need to speak with whoever is acting in Director Walsh's capacity this morning," Sina said. "That would be Associate Director Patricia Kim," the assistant said, "but she's not in yet." When she arrives, Sina said, "Please tell her that Nurse Mata from the third floor needs 10 minutes of her time before she accesses the director's records or the procurement files." She paused. "Please tell her that it's urgent and that Agent Reyes of the FBI can confirm why." The assistant wrote it down. Her hand was moving with the careful, slightly stunned energy of someone encountering a situation that was not covered in any of their training. Sina went back to the elevator. The OIG investigator, Deputy Webb, caught her on the second floor landing. He had clearly been looking for her here. He had the slightly breathless quality of a man who had been covering ground quickly. "I heard you went to the sixth floor," he said. "Walsh's staff came to work this morning," she said. "At least some of them. Administrative employees who processed his communications, his financial documents, his access requests. They need to be secured before anyone tips them off." Webb stared at her. "How did you say?" "Atlanta sedan outside the lobby. Driver ran when approached. They're already communicating with someone about the status of last night." She held his gaze. "If any of Walsh's staff moves to delete records or transfer files in the next 2 hours, you lose 5 years of evidence." Webb was on his phone before she finished the sentence. She went home. She drove through Nashville in the early morning light, through streets that did not know what the third floor of the VA had been through the night before, and she felt the particular compression of returning from somewhere to a world that had continued without reference to where she had been. It was a feeling she knew from other homecomings, from the transition between theaters and the quiet violence of returning to ordinary life. She had never fully resolved it. She had simply learned to carry it the same way she carried most things, steadily, quietly, without drawing attention to the weight. Her apartment was on the second floor of a building in East Nashville, small and clean, and furnished with the minimal precision of someone who had spent years living out of a bag and had never entirely recovered the habit of accumulating things. She set her keys on the counter. She set her phone beside them. She looked at the counter for a moment. She had 11 texts. One from Darnell sent at 4:30 in the morning. "You are something else, Matafa. Thank you for tonight." One from Casey Huang sent at 5. "I don't know how to say thank you, so I'm just going to say I see you." One from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be from Gloria Marsh, who had apparently gotten her number from the staff directory. "Good work. Get some sleep." 8 others from numbers she didn't recognize, which she did not open yet because the world could wait 2 hours. She lay down on her bed without changing out of her scrubs. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She dreamed, as she sometimes did, of Afghanistan. Not the bad parts, or not only the bad parts, but the specific quality of the air there, thin and cold at altitude, and the way the stars looked from the mountains, enormous and indifferent and present. She dreamed of her unit moving through terrain that required silence and the particular trust of moving through the dark with people whose lives you held and who held yours, the weight of that trust, which was not a burden, but a kind of anchor. She woke at noon. The sun was high and the apartment was warm, and her phone had 17 texts now and 2 missed calls, one from Reyes and one from a number with a DC area code that she did not immediately recognize. She sat up. She was still in her scrubs. Her left side was aching at the shrapnel site the way it ached when she had been on her feet too long. A dull, permanent conversation between her body and the metal that had decided to stay. She read Reyes's text first. "Walsh gave us 4 more names. DOJ is filing federal charges in Atlanta today. Kowalski is secure. Call me when you're up." She read the second U.S. Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. "They've heard about last night. They want to talk." She set the phone down. She sat on the edge of her bed and she breathed for a moment, the same controlled rhythm she always used in the moments between what had happened and what was going to happen next. She thought about 17 veterans, 22 veterans. She thought about the number that was probably still growing, the one that had not reached its final count yet, because the investigation had not reached its full depth. She thought about the fact that she had come to this hospital 4 years ago to be a nurse, to take care of people who needed taking care of, to do quietly and without recognition the work that she had always been good at, which was keeping people alive. She had done that. She was still doing that. She stood up. She changed. She made coffee. She called Reyes. "The DC number," she said when Reyes picked up. "Senate Veterans Affairs Committee," Reyes said. They move fast when something like this breaks. They want testimony about the Aryan contracts in the VA procurement system. I'm a nurse, Sina said, not a policy analyst. You're the person who caught it, Reyes said. That's what they want to hear about. What you saw, how you saw it, what the system failed to catch that you caught standing at a nurse's station at 11 o'clock at night. A pause. Matafa, what happened last night isn't going to stay in Nashville. It's already not staying in Nashville. She thought about the U.S. Senate. She thought about the men and women on her floor, on floors like hers at VA facilities across the country, who were lying in beds with defective implants and clean charts, and physicians who had been paid to see nothing wrong. She thought about 22 names. She thought about the ones that weren't counted yet. She thought about what it meant to be the person who stood between people and the thing that was coming for them, and whether that obligation had a boundary that ended at the third floor or whether it went further than that. She looked at her coffee. I'll call them, she said. I know you will, Reyes said. After they hung up, Sina sat at her kitchen table with the coffee and the phone and the quiet of her apartment around her. She thought about what she was going to say when she called the DC number. She thought about the kind of language that worked in rooms with senators and committees and the particular performance of institutional accountability. She had never been comfortable with that. Language had always preferred the language of action and presence and the specific, unambiguous grammar of just doing the work. But she had learned in 11 years of service that some rooms required a different vocabulary, that the work you did in the field meant nothing if the people who funded the field never understood why it mattered. That silence which had protected her for 4 years was a strategy with a limited lifespan, and the lifespan of this particular silence had ended at 11:22 the night before, when 3 men came through the stairwell door in tactical formation, and she picked up an IV pole. She called the DC number. It rang twice. A young woman's voice answered, professional crisp. Senator Caldwell's office. This is Sina Matafa, she said. I'm returning your call. There was a brief charged pause on the other end, the kind of pause that preceded something significant being said, and then the young woman's voice came back warmer and more direct. Ms. Matafa, the senator has been waiting for your call. Can you hold for 1 moment? I can, she said. She held her coffee cup and looked at her kitchen window and waited in the particular stillness of a woman who had learned a long time ago that some kinds of waiting were not passive at all, but were simply another form of preparation. The senator came on the line. Mr. Matafa, he said. His voice was older with the careful cadence of a Southern politician who had been doing this long enough to know when the moment required genuine rather than perform gravity. I've been briefed on what happened in Nashville last night, and I need to tell you what you did and what you found and what it means for the people we both serve. I need you to come to Washington. She was quiet for a moment. When she said, Senator Caldwell said Thursday. It was Monday morning. That gave her 3 days, which was enough time to give Reyes her full statement, meet with Deputy Webb's investigation team, finish her next scheduled shift, and pack a single bag for Washington, which was all she ever packed, regardless of destination, because she had never relearned the habit of needing more than what she could carry. She called Reyes first. Then she called Webb. Then she sat back down at her kitchen table and let the coffee go cold while she thought about what Thursday in Washington actually meant, which was not the logistics of it, but the weight of it. She had spent 4 years being invisible on purpose. She had built the invisibility carefully, deliberately, the way you build anything meant to last, with good materials and attention to the joints. And in the space of one night, that structure had come apart, not because she had made a mistake, but because she had done exactly what she was supposed to do, which was protect the people in her care. She did not regret it. Regret was for outcomes you could have changed by choosing differently, and there had been no version of the night before in which choosing differently would have served anyone better. But she understood, sitting in her kitchen with the Nashville morning outside her window, that the life she went back to was going to be shaped differently than the one she had been living. The question was not whether that was true. The question was what shape she would let it take. She went in for her Tuesday shift. The third floor was different in ways that were both visible and not. There were still 2 federal agents stationed at the stairwell entrances, though they were less conspicuous about it now. The evidence markers were gone. The overhead lights were back to their nighttime setting, amber and steady. On the surface, everything looked like it always had, but the nurses moved differently. Not worse, if anything, with more deliberate care, the way people move through familiar spaces after something has happened in them that changes the meaning of the familiar. Casey Huang was back, which Sina had not expected, and when she saw Sina come through the door at 10:45, she stopped what she was doing and said plainly and without preamble, I'm glad you were here. So am I, Sina said. Darnell was at the station running handoff notes, and he looked up and looked at her with the expression he had worn since Sunday morning, the one that had not fully resolved into any single emotion, but contained many of them at once. And he said, "Kowalski's been asking about you." "I'll check on him," she said. She made her rounds first. 14 patients, the same as always, the same careful sequence she always followed. Walter Bream was awake also as always, and he had crackers on his bedside table that he did not attempt to hide when she came in, which she took as a sign of either trust or defiance, and she chose to interpret as both. "Heard you're going to Washington," he said. She paused. "Word travels." "Hospital," he said, like that explained everything, which it did. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," she said. He considered this. "All of it. All of it." "Good." He pulled his blanket up with the careful economy of a man managing his own limits. "Tell them about the crackers, too. These things they give us in here are terrible, and I've been complaining about it for 11 months. She almost laughed. She didn't quite get there, but it was close, and Walter saw it and seemed satisfied. She went to room 305 last. Frank Kowalski looked better than he had any right to look 2 days after the worst night of a protection detail that had already been the worst experience of his life. He had color in his face, and he was sitting up straight, which told her something about the architecture of the man, that he straightened under pressure rather than folding, which was a specific kind of character that either hardened or broke depending on what it was made of, and his was clearly hardened. "Thursday," he said when she came in. "Not a question." "Thursday," she confirmed. "I testify in 11 days. "I know." He looked at her. "They're going to try to use you," he said. "In Washington, the committee. They're going to want the story, the nurse, the special forces background, the night shift, the IV pole. They're going to want the version that plays well in front of cameras." "I know that too. And I'm going to give them the version that's true," she said, "which is that 22 veterans were failed by people who were supposed to protect them, and that the system that allowed it is still in place at 11 other VA facilities, and that the procurement process for medical implants needs to be completely restructured." She paused. "The IV pole is incidental." Frank looked at her for a long measuring moment. "My daughter's letter came," he said. Sina waited. "She wrote 3 pages. His voice had a different quality when he talked about his daughter, not softer exactly, but unguarded in a way that everything else about him was not. 3 pages by hand. She's 24 years old, and she wrote 3 pages by hand because she said some things aren't right for email. He cleared his throat. "She said she wants to meet you when this is over." "Tell her I'd like that," Sina said. She finished his chart. She checked his IV. She was at the door when he said, "Matafa." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the other night." "Well, for the other night too, but mostly for the chart. For seeing the chart and refusing to let it go even when Harris overrode you. That's where it started. That's the thing that actually saved my life." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "That's the job," she said. "No," he said quietly. "That's you." She went back to her rounds. The next day, Webb's team came to the hospital for her formal statement. They set up in the family consultation room, the same small room with the round table where she had sat with Reyes 2 nights before, and there were 3 of them, 2 investigators and a court recorder, and they were thorough and methodical in the way that federal investigators are thorough and methodical, which is to say they asked every question twice from different angles and wrote down everything, including the things that seemed too small to matter. She told them about the chart. She told them about the medication entry and the timestamp, and the specific pathway through the record system that the alteration had taken. She told them about flagging it and Harris's response, and the physical note she had made in the paper backup and the photograph on her phone. She told them about the 3 days of watching and what she had been watching for. She told them about the night itself and the sequential, factual ways she reported everything without drama and without omission. When she was done, the lead investigator, a man named Carver, who had been running OIG investigations for 12 years, and who had the practiced neutrality of someone who had heard a great many serious things and had learned not to react to them in real time, looked at his notes and then looked at her and said, "You photographed the chart on the same day you flagged it?" "Yes," she said, before Harris overrode the entry. "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because I knew he was going to override it," she said, "and I knew he was going to document it as a nursing misread, and I wanted a record that existed outside the system." Carver looked at her for a moment. "How did you know he was going to do that?" "Because of how he responded when I told him," she said. "Not what he said, how he responded, the specific way a person moves and speaks when they're managing information rather than receiving it. I've seen it before. In what context? Field interrogation, she said. Afghanistan. When someone already knows what you're telling them and is deciding in real time how to handle the fact that you know it too. The room was quiet. You treated this hospital as a field operation, Carver said. I treated my patient as someone in danger, she said. The rest followed from that. She flew to Washington on Wednesday evening. The flight was 90 minutes and she spent most of it looking at the documents Webb's team had sent her, the full scope of the Aryan Medical Group investigation as it now stood, which was considerably broader than what Reyes had outlined Monday morning. There were now 6 VA facilities confirmed to have used Aryan implants under falsified quality reports. 31 veterans with documented complications, 4 deaths, 12 Aryan executives under federal investigation, and a procurement policy gap at the VAA level that had allowed a single contractor to hold preferred vendor status across multiple facilities for 8 consecutive years without a competitive rebid process. 31 veterans. She held that number the way she always held numbers like that fully without looking away because the weight of it was the point. The weight of it was the reason Thursday existed. The Senate hearing room was larger than she had expected and smaller than she had feared. She had been in rooms like this before, functionally, if not literally, rooms where the structure of the space was designed to make the person at the center of it feel exposed and accountable, where the elevated seating and the formal arrangement were themselves a kind of argument about power. She had spent 11 years in environments where power expressed itself through entirely different architectures, and she had learned in those environments that the room was never the thing that mattered. The thing that mattered was what you came in knowing and what you were willing to say. Senator Caldwell was at the center of the committee panel. He was in his late 60s, white-haired, with the kind of face that had earned its lines honestly, and he looked at Sina when she sat down at the witness table with the attention of a man who had been doing his homework. The room was full. Press section full, public gallery full. Sina noted this without being distracted by it. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at the panel. Caldwell opened. Ms. Matafa, before we begin, I want to say for the record that what you did last Monday night at the Nashville V Medical Center was an act of extraordinary courage and extraordinary competence. On behalf of the committee and on behalf of the veterans this body serves, thank you. Thank you, Senator, she said. I'd like to get to the part that matters, if that's all right. Caldwell blinked. Something shifted in the room, a collective adjustment, the sound of an audience recalibrating. Then Caldwell leaned forward slightly and said, please. She talked for 40 minutes. She did not talk about the IV pole or the maintenance corridor or the 3 men in the stairwell, except insofar as those things connected to the systemic failures that had made them possible. She talked about Frank Kowalski's chart. She talked about the medication alteration and what it represented, not just an attempt on one man's life, but the endpoint of a years-long pattern of institutional corruption that had been invisible precisely because nobody had looked for it. She talked about what a night shift nurse sees that a day shift administrator does not, which is the hospital operating outside the performance mode it puts on during regular hours. She talked about Walter Bream, about Raymond Torres, about the 11 other patients on her floor who had come to the VA because they had nowhere else that understood what they needed and who deserved to be in a place that was actually keeping them safe. She talked about 31 names. She put them on the record one by one, the veterans whose complications had been documented in the OIG investigation. She read their names slowly, and the room was silent for it, the particular silence of a space in which a number that had been abstract has been made specific. When she finished, Senator Caldwell said, "What do you need from this committee, Ms. Matafa?" She had prepared for this question. 3 things, she said. First, an independent audit of Aryan Medical Group's contracts at all 11 VA facilities where their implants were used, with a full review of every patient chart for any alteration patterns matching what was found in Nashville. She paused. Second, a restructuring of the VA's preferred vendor designation process to require competitive rebidding every 2 years and independent quality audits that are not administered by the contracting facility. Another pause. Third, a whistleblower protection mechanism that is accessible to nursing staff and not just physicians. The chart alteration that I caught was something a physician could have flagged with institutional backing. I flagged it as a nurse and was overridden and documented as incompetent. The system as it stands protects the people with the most power to abuse it. The room was very still. Caldwell looked at his colleagues on either side. He looked back at Sina. "That's a specific list," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she said. "What happened after the hearing happened, in the way that things happen when a moment catches a current larger than itself, fast in multiple directions at once, with a momentum that had its own logic and didn't wait for anyone to decide how to feel about it. The committee voted unanimously before the end of the day to open an emergency audit of all 11 facilities. The VA secretary released a statement by 4 in the afternoon. The Department of Justice announced a full indictment of 7 Aryan Medical Group executives by 6. It was on every national news broadcast by 8. Sina watched none of it. She was on the phone with Reyes when the DOJ announcement came through, and Reyes read the key points aloud with the compressed satisfaction of a person who had been building toward this outcome through 2 days of 18-hour work, and Sina listened and said, "The 4 deaths, the families." Being contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office today, Reyes said, "Victim compensation process is starting immediately." "Good," Sina said. "Then the sedan from Monday, Atlanta plates." "Identified and in custody," Reyes said. "Arian's head of security. He was sent to assess the damage after the Nashville operation collapsed. He's cooperating." A pause. "Matafa, it's done. The Nashville piece of it is done." "The 11 other facilities," she said, "are being handled," Reyes said, "by the OIG, by the FBI field offices in their regions, by the U.S. Attorney. You started something that is very much continuing without requiring you to personally see it through." Another pause, warmer this time. "Go home." She flew back to Nashville on Thursday evening. The flight was the same 90 minutes. She spent it differently this time, not reading, not preparing, just sitting with the window dark beside her and the cabin quiet around her, and the particular feeling of a thing completed that had not been completed when it started, which was the best possible version of how things could go. Darnell picked her up at the airport. She had not asked him to. He was simply there when she came out of the terminal, leaning against his car in the Nashville night, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the easy patience of a man who had decided this was what he was going to do and had no interest in explaining it further. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. They drove back to the city without talking much, and the not talking had the comfortable texture of 2 people who had been through something together and did not need to keep describing it to each other to make it real. At some point, Darnell turned down the radio and said, "Casey put in for trauma counseling. First time in her career she's done that." "Good," Sina said. "She said you told her it was okay to need it." "It is." "Is it okay for you to need it?" He kept his eyes on the road, which was its own kind of consideration. She thought about it honestly. "Probably," she said. "Are you going to do anything about that?" She thought about that too. "Eventually," she said. He nodded. He understood eventually. He put the radio back up. She was back on the 3rd floor Friday night. Coconut bread at the security desk. Gerald took it without ceremony and said, "Welcome back," in the tone of a man for whom those 2 words carried considerably more than their literal weight. And she nodded and kept walking to the elevator and rode up to the 3rd floor and came through the doors and felt the floor receive her the way it always did, with its ambient warmth and its steady beeps and its amber light and its 14 patients who needed someone to pay attention through the dark hours. Walter Bream was awake. He would always be awake. "How'd it go?" he said. "Well," she said, "they listened." They did. He reached over and patted her hand once briefly without making a production of it. "Good girl," he said in the voice of a man who meant it as the highest form of recognition available to him, which it was, and she received it that way. She went back to her rounds. The thing that changed in the weeks that followed changed gradually. The way significant things tend to change, not in a single moment but in the accumulation of small adjustments that only become visible in retrospect. The OIG audit at the 11 VA facilities found pattern-matching chart alterations at 3 of them, all traceable to Arian's network of influence physicians. 27 additional veterans were identified and entered into the compensation process. The VA's Inspector General testified before the same committee 2 weeks after Sina did and cited her identification of the medication alteration as the originating event of the entire investigation. Frank Kowalski testified on the scheduled date. He was steady and precise and complete, and his testimony lasted 4 days and covered 8 years of Aryan Medical Group's falsified quality documentation in granular, irrefutable detail. The federal case built on what he said and what Sina's evidence had started would take 18 months to fully prosecute, but the shape of it was clear from the beginning. It was the shape of an ending. The hospital offered Sina a promotion 3 weeks after the hearing. Head of nursing for the 3rd floor day shift, a significant salary increase, and a title and the particular visibility that came with both. The offer came from the acting director, Patricia Kim, who had taken Walsh's role in the interim and who had, in the weeks since the investigation began, proven to be precisely the kind of administrator the hospital had needed for a long time, direct, transparent, and unbothered by the discomfort of accountability. Kim called her into the sixth-floor office on a Tuesday afternoon and laid it out clearly without ceremony. You've demonstrated qualifications and judgment that exceed the scope of your current role, Kim said. We want to formalize that. Sina looked at the window. She thought about day shift, about the way the hospital performed differently in daylight than it did in the dark, about all the things the night revealed that the day covered. She thought about Walter Bream's arrhythmia at midnight and Frank Kowalski's IV line and the specific weight of the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning, when the floor was at its most vulnerable and most in need of someone who knew how to pay attention. I appreciate it, she said, but I need to stay on nights. Kim studied her. That's not a negotiating position. No, she said. Then what would make nights better for you? What do you need? Then it was the right question. Sina had been thinking about it since Washington. A structured mentorship program for night shift nursing staff, she said. Trauma response training, not just the standard certification, actual field-relevant emergency protocols. And a direct reporting line for chart discrepancies that goes to the medical director, not the attending physician. She paused. The system that allowed Harris to override my flag should not exist in this hospital anymore. Kim wrote it down, all of it, without qualification or deflection. Done, she said. What else? Better crackers in room 302, Sina said. Kim looked up. Walter Bream, Sina said. He's been requesting it for 11 months. Kim looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote that down too. The mentorship program launched 6 weeks later. Sina ran the first session on a Thursday evening before her shift in the break room with 7 nurses who had signed up and 2 who had been specifically asked by Gloria Marsh to attend. She talked for 2 hours about field emergency medicine, about reading a situation, before it fully declared itself about the discipline of continuing to work when everything around you had become something other than what it was supposed to be. She talked about the specific difference between reacting and responding, which was the same difference as between what a system did and what a person decided to do. She told them about the chart. She told them about the photograph. She told them that the most important thing she had done the night of the incident was not what happened in the corridor or the stairwell or the maintenance tunnel, but the thing she had done 3 days earlier when she noticed something wrong in a medical record and refused to accept that her noticing was incorrect. Trust what you see, she said. Document everything. And never ever let someone with more institutional authority than you convince you that your clinical judgment is the thing that needs to be corrected. The 7 nurses wrote that down. The 2 who had been specifically asked to attend wrote it down twice. She was leaving the break room when one of the younger nurses, a 26-year-old named Diana Torres, no relation to Raymond, stopped her in the doorway with the slightly uncertain energy of someone who had been building up to saying something for a while. Can I ask you something? Diana said. Go ahead. How did you know the night of the incident, when you heard them come through the stairwell? How did you know they weren't just maintenance staff or security or something normal? Sina thought about this. She thought about how to answer it in a way that was honest rather than impressive, because Diana Torres was going to be a good nurse if she had good information, and impressive was not good information. I've heard a lot of different people move through a lot of different environments, she said. Normal movement has a certain rhythm. People who are trained to move tactically have a different one. Once you've heard the difference enough times, you can't unhear it. She paused. But that's not actually the answer to your question. Diana waited. The answer is that I was already paying attention, Sina said. I had been paying attention for 3 days because I knew something was wrong, and I had not found all of it yet. And when you're already paying attention, really paying attention with everything you have, you catch things you would miss if you were just going through the motions. She looked at Diana directly. Most nursing is going through the motions, and that's fine. That's what keeping 14 patients stable requires. But some moments require everything. The skill is knowing which is which. Diana nodded slowly. How do you know which is which? You practice paying attention, Sina said. All the time, even when nothing is happening, especially when nothing is happening. She went to start her shift. The floor was the same as it always was. 14 patients, amber light, monitors in their steady conversation with the night. She moved through it with the same unhurried pace that had puzzled Darnell Webb for 2 years, that covered ground faster than anyone expected, that had turned out to contain 11 years of Special Forces medicine and 3 tours in places that did not appear on any map, and the specific hard-won knowledge of a woman who had spent her life learning what it meant to stay when leaving would have been easier. She was at Walter Bream's door when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a Virginia area code. She opened it. It said, "This is Lieutenant Sarah Kowalski. My dad told me you'd be working tonight. I wanted to say thank you in real time. Is this okay? She stopped. She looked at the message. She thought about Frank in his hospital bed telling her about his daughter who wrote 3 pages by hand because some things weren't right for email. She thought about a 24-year-old second lieutenant who had her father's eyes probably and her father's ability to take the measure of a person before deciding to trust them. She typed back, "This is fine. How is he?" The response came in under a minute strong, nervous about tomorrow's session, but strong. "He said you'd know what that means." She did. She typed, "Tell him it's supposed to feel that way. It means he knows what matters." A pause, then, "He said you'd say something like that too." She put the phone in her pocket. She pushed open room 302. Walter Bream was awake. He had new crackers on his bedside table. Better ones, the kind that came in a proper box instead of a cellophane wrapper, and he was eating one with the satisfied deliberateness of a man whose 11th month of complaints had finally been heard. He saw her look at the crackers. "Talk to administration," he said. "I know," she said. "Good crackers," he said. "I'm glad," she said. She checked his vitals. She adjusted his oxygen. She made her note. She went back into the corridor, and she moved through the rest of her floor the way she always moved, steady, present, paying attention, and the night settled around her the way nights settle around people who have earned their right to be exactly where they are, doing exactly what they are doing without apology and without spectacle. Sina Matafa had never wanted to be a hero. She had wanted to be a nurse, and she was the finest one on that floor, and everyone who mattered now knew it, and the people in her care were safer for it, and that was not a small thing. That was everything.